The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air inside Dr. Richardson's office, where time seemed to have stopped. A soft hum from the fluorescent light above the ticking of a clock, and Monica's uneven breath were the only sounds left. The doctor closed the folder slowly, as though buying her a few more seconds before the verdict. His voice was gentle, but it sliced through her chest like the edge of glass. "Mrs. Siovich, I'm sorry. Your uterine lining shows severe scarring. Natural conception will be almost impossible." Almost impossible. 2 words that shattered 3 years of trying, 3 years of whispered prayers into the dark. Across from her, Jeff's hand slipped out of hers as if her skin burned. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even blink. Monica stared at him, desperate for something, a squeeze of her fingers, a whisper of "we'll find another way," the smallest gesture of hope. But all she found was silence. And in that silence, something inside her began to break, not all at once, but like a sheet of glass cracking down the middle. The drive home was wordless. Snow had begun to fall, melting the moment it touched the windshield, leaving trails that looked like tears. Monica pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the suburban houses blur into ghosts of the life she had imagined. Backyards filled with toys, holiday lights strung across porches, laughter behind fogged windows. She could almost see herself among them, the woman she'd once dreamed of being, a mother, a wife, a part of something gentle. But that woman was slipping away. Jeff's hands tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath. "We could try IVF or adoption. There are options, Jeff." He didn't look at her. "Not tonight, Monica. Please." That was when she knew. The distance between them wasn't new. It had just found its final form, a silence too thick to cross. When they got home, the air inside their house felt wrong, too clean, too perfect, too hollow. Every photo on the wall, every candle she'd chosen, every little memory of us, suddenly looked like a set piece in someone else's life. She sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of her teacup, while Jeff disappeared upstairs. A moment later, the front door opened again, and she heard the sharp, clicking footsteps that had haunted her since the day she married him. Monica, Cordelia Henkins, stood in the doorway, her fur collar dusted with snow, her lipstick flawless. She had never once entered this house without permission until tonight. Behind her elegant composure, there was the gleam of satisfaction, as though she'd been waiting years for this moment. "Jeffrey called me," she said, removing her gloves one finger at a time. "He told me about your situation." Situation. Monica almost laughed. The word turned her body into a problem, to be solved, a failure to be judged. "It's not a situation," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "It's a medical diagnosis." Cordelia's blue eyes gleamed like winter ice. "Call it what you like. The result is the same. You can't give my son children. You've failed at the most basic duty of a wife." Monica's pulse thundered in her ears. "You don't get to define my worth." "Oh, darling," Cordelia said softly, almost pitying. "I'm not defining anything. Nature already did that for you." The words landed harder than any slap could. Jeff came down the stairs, just then, his face pale, his shirt still buttoned wrong from his nervous fingers. "Mother, please," he muttered. "This isn't the time." "It's never the time, Jeffrey. That's how weak men live their lives, waiting for the right time that never comes." Monica turned to him, desperate. "Jeff, tell her to stop. Tell her this isn't fair." He met her eyes, and in that look she saw everything: guilt, exhaustion, and the quiet surrender of a man too afraid to fight. "Mom's just worried about our future." Something cold uncoiled inside Monica's chest. Our future, she asked softly. Do you mean our future or yours and hers? The question hung between them like smoke. Cordelia's lips curved. He deserves a family, Monica. A real family. The Henkins men have always built legacies. What can you offer him now? Monica rose from her chair, her voice shaking. Love. Loyalty. A partnership. Love. Cordelia laughed a brittle, hollow sound. Love doesn't carry a name. Legacy does. The argument spiraled words like daggers, each one cutting a little deeper, when Monica, trembling with anger, spat back. Maybe if you'd loved your husband more, he wouldn't have died miserable. The air froze. The slap came swift and hard, the sound echoing against marble floors. Cordelia's palm stung across her cheek, but the pain barely registered before she saw Jeff standing motionless. Eyes dark, jaw clenched. He didn't defend her, didn't even move. You will not speak to my mother that way, he said finally, his voice low and cold. For a heartbeat, Monica couldn't breathe. This was the man who'd once held her through panic attacks, who'd built her dream nursery before they'd even conceived the man she'd believed would fight the world for her. And now, he was her executioner. You're really choosing her over me, she whispered. I'm choosing reality, he said, stepping closer. You can't give me what I need. Something inside her broke cleanly in two. She didn't remember packing. Only the rhythmic sound of drawers closing, of zippers, sliding, of her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Outside, snow thickened, blanketing the street in white silence. Jeff stood by the doorway, his mother behind him like a shadow he couldn't escape. Monica zipped her suitcase, her face streaked with tears she refused to wipe away. You'll regret this, she said quietly, not as a curse, but as a truth. Maybe, Jeff replied, but at least I'll have peace. She walked past him, past Cordelia's triumphant smirk, and opened the door. The winter wind rushed in cold and sharp against her burning cheek. For a moment, she looked back. Jeff had already turned away. Cordelia was whispering something into his ear. It struck Monica then how love doesn't die with one betrayal. It dies with 1,000 small silences. She stepped out into the night. The snow swallowed the sound of her footsteps. Each flake melted against her skin like tiny fragments of forgiveness she wasn't ready to give. She walked until the streetlights blurred into halos, and her suitcase wheels dragged uneven lines behind her. At the corner, she stopped, breath clouding in the frozen air. From the distance, their house still glowed faintly warm light, spilling through the curtains like a world that no longer belonged to her. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, the ache in her chest sinking deeper than bone. Maybe love was never meant to save me, she whispered to the dark. Maybe it was meant to break me open. A car honked somewhere down the street. A stray dog barked. Life indifferent went on. Monica turned away from the light and walked toward the city, toward the unknown, toward herself. Behind her, snow erased her footprints, as if she had never existed there at all. But something remained. A flicker, faint but alive, the instinct that had always carried her through every storm. Hope, or perhaps defiance. She didn't know yet. Only that for the first time in years, she was free, wounded, empty, but free. And somewhere buried deep within that emptiness, something small and miraculous was already beginning to grow. The apartment was barely the size of her old walk-in closet. Its single window faced a brick wall, and when it rained, water seeped through the corners of the glass, tracing crooked veins down the plaster, like the veins on her own wrist. Monica dropped her single suitcase on the floor. It fell open, clothes spilling like torn pieces of another life. Her wedding dress packed at the bottom was creased beyond repair, a pale ghost folded among dark sweaters and old papers. For a moment she just stood there listening, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind against the pane, the silence where his voice used to be. Then she sank to the floor, knees pulled to her chest, and let herself cry, not the quiet, restrained tears of someone holding dignity, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone who had finally stopped pretending. The sound filled the room like a confession. Days blurred. She woke, worked part-time at a downtown insurance office, came home to cold noodles and colder nights. Sometimes she caught herself reaching for the other side of the bed expecting warmth, finding only emptiness. One morning, as she brushed her teeth, a sharp wave of nausea rose out of nowhere. She barely made it to the sink before her body betrayed her convulsing, trembling, gasping. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, eyes sunk in hair, limp lips, pale. She rinsed her mouth, staring at herself for a long time. Then she whispered, "No, it can't be." But the thought had already rooted itself. At the pharmacy across the street, she bought 3 pregnancy tests, the cheap kind, the kind for women who can't afford to be wrong. Back in the apartment, she lined them on the counter like evidence in a trial. Her hands shook as she opened the first. A drop of urine, a weight of eternity, and then faint but unmistakable, a second pink line. Her knees buckled. She sat down on the bathroom floor, heart racing. "No, no, it's impossible." The doctor said. Her voice cracked. But when she opened the second test, the same 2 pink lines appeared. And the third. They glowed faintly under the bathroom light like tiny neon promises. She laughed through tears, a sound half joy, half disbelief. "You're joking with me," she whispered, staring at the sticks as if they could answer. "This can't be real." The world had taken everything from her, and now in the ruins, it was giving her this. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the rain hit the glass in rhythmic bursts. The city lights blurred behind a curtain of water, each drop distorting the world outside, just as grief had distorted hers. Her hand rested on her belly, though there was nothing to feel, yet no movement, no sign, only the fragile possibility of life. Inside her 2 heartbeats were beginning to form, unaware of the storm that awaited them. She thought of Jeff. Would he care? Would he believe her? Would Cordelia call her a liar as always? The thought of facing them made her stomach twist, not from nausea this time, but from fear. She imagined Cordelia's icy smile, still clinging to my son even now. No, she wouldn't go back. Not to that house. Not to those voices that fed on her pain. But then came another whisper, quieter, gentler. They're his children too. And for a moment, she almost reached for her phone. When she finally did call, it wasn't him who answered. A woman's voice, smooth, confident, unfamiliar. Jeff Henkin's phone. I need to speak with him," Monica said. "He's unavailable right now." "Who's calling?" "Tell him." "It's Monica." There was a pause. The woman exhaled softly the way one might at an inconvenience. "He asked not to take your calls." The line went dead. For a long time, Monica sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. The rain outside turned to hail tiny stones clattering against the window. That was how her world sounded now, cold, hard, relentless. The next day, she gathered her courage and went to the Henkins estate. The guard at the gate looked startled to see her hair damp from drizzle, coat too thin for the chill. But when she said, "I just need 5 minutes," pity softened his eyes. He buzzed her in. The house loomed ahead, tall and immaculate. The same white pillars, the same roses she'd planted once, by the front door now trimmed and perfect like everything Cordelia touched. She rang the bell. Cordelia opened it herself, dressed in a silk robe, as if she'd been expecting her. "Monica," she said, her smile sharp as glass. I wondered how long it would take. Monica's voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. "I just need to talk to Jeff. It's important." Cordelia's eyes flicked to her stomach, then back to her face. "You're not here because you miss him. You're here because you think you can trap him." Monica's throat tightened. "That's not true. He deserves to know. He knows everything that matters." Cordelia stepped closer, her perfume thick and suffocating. "Listen to me carefully. Jeff is moving on. He's building a life with someone who can give him one. If you try to interfere, I will destroy you." Monica's lips parted 1,000 words, fighting to escape, but nothing came. She turned, tears stinging, and walked back into the rain. Behind her, the door shut with a final echoing click. That night she sat at her small table with an open notebook. The pages were damp from her tears, but she wrote anyway. They say ashes mean endings, but maybe they're also beginnings. The city outside buzzed and hissed with rain, the kind of storm that made streetlights flicker and windows hum. She wrote until her hand ached. "If no one believes in me, I will learn to believe in myself. If love abandons me, I will raise my own love with my bare hands." Then she placed her palm over her stomach again, that small, fragile space where 2 miracles waited. The thought scared her. 2, not 1. The sonogram she'd taken earlier that day from a small clinic she'd found in a newspaper ad had shown it clearly. 2 heartbeats, 2 lives. She was terrified. The rent was overdue. Her savings were barely enough for a month. But when she closed her eyes, she saw 2 flickering lights inside her, tiny, defiant sparks in the dark. She whispered to them, her voice barely audible beneath the storm. "I don't know who we'll become, but I promise you this will never be anyone's mistake." Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the rain tapped against the window, gentle now, almost like applause. Monica lay in bed, listening to the sound of it. The world outside was chaos, but inside, for the first time, she felt something close to peace, because beneath her ribs, life pulsed, small, steady, and impossibly brave. And as sleep finally took her, Monica dreamt of 2 hands reaching out of the darkness, her son someday leading her back toward the light she'd forgotten she still carried. The storm arrived before dawn. Snow whirled outside the small clinic like a curtain of ghosts smothering the sound of the world. Inside, Monica gripped the edges of the metal bed as pain tore through her body, each contraction sharp enough to split her in half. There were no flowers, no family waiting in the corridor, only the hum of the heater and the nurse's soft, hurried voice. "Hold on, sweetheart. You're almost there." She wanted to scream, but her throat was dry, her lips cracked. Her body shook, drenched in sweat. And then 2 cries broke through the storm. Not 1. 2. The sound filled the room like a miracle breaking glass. Hours later, Monica lay still, exhausted, her face turned toward the window. Outside, snowflakes pressed against the glass, melting into tiny rivers that shimmered under the pale light. The nurse placed 2 swaddled bundles beside her. "Congratulations, honey. Twin boys." Her chest ached with something she had no name for, joy tangled with terror, gratitude edged with disbelief. She touched their faces, one after another, so small, so impossibly human. Their fingers curled around hers, as if claiming her before the world could. "Darius," she whispered to the quieter one, whose eyes fluttered open with a calm curiosity. "And you," she said, turning to the second, restless and kicking. "You'll be Max." Her voice trembled. "Welcome home, my little storms." The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of hunger, fear, and love. The rent was overdue. Her body ached from childbirth. Formula was expensive. She rationed diapers, cut her meals in half, and slept in 20-minute fragments between feedings. Sometimes, when the twins cried in unison, her heart raced so fast she thought it might stop. She'd walk the narrow hallway, humming nonsense lullabies, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll be okay. I'll figure it out. I promise." Each night when silence finally came, she'd collapse onto the couch, still in her work clothes, still smelling of coffee and printer ink from her job at the insurance desk. She wasn't sure how she was still standing. But then one of the boys would stir in his sleep, his tiny hands searching the air until it found hers. And somehow, that was enough. Spring arrived late that year. Chicago thawed, slowly, puddles forming on the cracked sidewalks like small mirrors. Monica pushed the stroller down the street toward the community college where she'd enrolled in night classes. Her classmates were half her age, bright-eyed, unburdened. They didn't know what it meant to study after washing baby bottles at midnight or to memorize case law while holding a feverish child. Sometimes she felt invisible among them. But invisibility had its advantage. It allowed her to listen, to absorb, to quietly outwork them all. She learned the language of justice, the way others learn to breathe. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman once deemed unfit to be a mother, now studying how to defend those the world discards. By autumn, the twins were crawling. By winter, walking. And by the next spring, Monica was accepted into the pre-law program at Northwestern. She read the email 3 times, unable to move. The boys were sitting on the living room floor, building towers out of cereal boxes. When she picked them up, laughing through tears, they squealed and clapped, not understanding why. "We did it," she whispered into their curls. "We're going to law school." She taped the acceptance letter to the wall above the kitchen table. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that the world could bruise her, but not bury her. Still, victory came with its own kind of loneliness. Her classmates came from polished families, spoke of summer internships and vacations in Europe. Monica spoke of courtrooms she dreamed of entering someday, of childcare she couldn't afford, of nights spent studying while both boys slept on her lap. Sometimes exhaustion felt heavier than grief. She'd walk home after midnight, the city cold and empty, and wonder if she was asking too much of herself. One night in the small hours, the power went out during a thunderstorm. The apartment plunged into darkness. Max woke first, crying, then Darius. Monica stumbled through the dark, gathering them into her arms, rocking them as lightning flashed through the window. "Shh, it's okay. Mama's here." Her own fear dissolved as their warmth filled her. Outside, thunder rolled like an angry god, but inside, 3 heartbeats kept perfect rhythm. For the first time, she realized she wasn't alone. The following year, she took her first internship with a public interest law firm. Her supervisor, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes, noticed her one late evening as Monica dozed over a pile of briefs. "You have the look of someone rebuilding herself," the woman said. Monica smiled, embarrassed. "I suppose I am." "Good. Don't stop. The world needs more people who rise from ashes and still choose light." That night, as she rode the train home, she saw her reflection in the darkened window, older, thinner, but steadier. The storm in her eyes had quieted. On graduation day, the twins wore matching blue ties and grinned from ear to ear. They were 7 now, gangly, full of mischief. When Monica walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she spotted them in the crowd, waving wildly, shouting, "That's our mom!" Her vision blurred. The dean shook her hand. "Congratulations, Ms. Siovich. Northwestern Law." The applause washed over her like sunlight. Later back home, the boys sat on her lap, tracing the embossed letters on the diploma. "What does it say, Mom?" Max asked. "It says we made it," she whispered. "Is that why you're crying?" Darius asked. "Yes," she said, smiling through the tears. "Because it's beautiful to start over." They didn't understand, not yet, that those words marked more than her achievement. They marked the moment she forgave herself for ever doubting she could do this. That night, after the boys were asleep, Monica stood by the window again, the same kind of window she'd once watched snow through alone. Now the glass reflected 3 shapes instead of 1. The city glittered below her, alive, pulsing. In the faint reflection, she saw her younger self, the woman who had walked out into a blizzard with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. "You did it," she whispered to her reflection. "You kept us alive." And maybe she thought that was what motherhood truly was, not perfection, not sacrifice, but the quiet, relentless act of beginning again. Outside, wind brushed the rooftops, gentle now, not angry. Inside, her sons dreamed in their beds, the rhythm of their breathing steady and strong. For the first time in years, Monica let herself imagine the future, not as a fight for survival, but as a garden waiting to bloom. The seeds had been planted in the storm, and now, at last, they were beginning to grow. 5 years later, the skyline of Chicago gleamed like polished steel beneath a winter sun. From the corner office of the 35th floor, Monica Seovich stood with her arms crossed, her reflection blending with the city beyond the glass. The window stretched from ceiling to floor, transparent, fearless, like the woman she had become. The brass plaque on her desk read, "Seovich and Associates Family Law." Her name, once something she'd wanted to hide, now stood in gold. Her office was quiet, except for the rustle of papers and the distant hum of traffic below. On the wall hung photographs, not of degrees or awards, but of faces. A mother holding her child after winning custody. A woman stepping out of a courthouse with tears of relief. A teenager smiling shyly after emancipation from an abusive home. Every case had left its mark on her. Every victory, a small resurrection. When Monica looked at them, she didn't see clients. She saw ghosts of herself, women who had been silenced, cornered, or told they were less than. Now they stood tall, and in each one, she saw proof that pain could be turned into power. That afternoon, she sat across from a new client, a young woman named Lila. Her left eye still bruised, her hands trembling as she held the edge of the chair. "He says he'll take my daughter," Lila whispered. "He says no one will believe me." Monica leaned forward, her voice calm and certain. "They will. I've seen this before. You'll walk out of that courtroom with your daughter. I promise you." The woman nodded, barely believing. As Monica handed her a tissue, their fingers brushed, and in that fleeting contact, something wordless passed between them. "I know. I've been where you are." When the woman left, Monica sat in silence, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. For a moment, she wasn't the attorney in heels and pearls. She was the woman who'd once packed a suitcase in the middle of the night, bleeding hope and fear. At home, life moved with its own rhythm, noisy, imperfect, full of warmth. Darius and Max were 10 now. Darius, thoughtful and steady, spent evenings sketching skylines on his notebook, his mind already dreaming in architecture. Max, fiery and curious, had inherited her stubborn streak, always asking why, never accepting. "Because I said so." Their laughter filled the apartment, echoing against the high ceilings like music. Every morning before school, they raced to kiss her cheek first. Every night she read them stories about heroes, not princes or warriors, but people who rebuilt what was broken. Sometimes, when she watched them sleep, She marveled at how life could bloom from ruin. Their eyes, green and brown mingled with flecks of blue, were reminders of where she'd come from and how far she'd gone. Two fragments of the past alive in the present. One evening, as she waited for the kettle to whistle, Max looked up from his homework. "Mom." "Yes, love." "Did we ever have a dad?" The question landed softly, but pierced deep. She dried her hands on a towel, turned, and met his gaze. "You have everything you need," she said gently. "But who was he?" Max pressed. "Someone who belongs to an old chapter of my life," she said after a pause. "A chapter that helped me find the strength to write a new one." Darius watched quietly, as if he already understood more than he should. "So, we're your new chapter?" he asked. Monica smiled. "No, baby. You're the whole book." The kettle whistled then, and she turned away, blinking hard. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Monica sat at her desk by the window. The city stretched below like a web of light and noise, but up here she could hear her thoughts. On her desk lay a new case file, one that hit too close to home. A wealthy businessman, accused of abandoning his pregnant wife after discovering she might be infertile. The headlines were everywhere. The resemblance to her own past was uncanny. She should have refused the case. Too personal, too raw. But when she looked at the photograph of the woman hollow-eyed alone, clutching her belly, as if protecting the only thing that mattered, Monica knew she couldn't walk away. She would take it. Not for vengeance, but for every woman who'd been left behind when life stopped making sense. Weeks later, during the hearing, she stood before the judge, her voice unwavering. "Your Honor," she said, "the law cannot measure love, but it can measure responsibility. My client carried life alone. She deserves not pity, but justice." Her words carried through the courtroom like wind cutting through fog. When the verdict came in favor of the woman, Monica felt the same surge of warmth she had felt the day her sons first smiled at her. The woman hugged her outside the courthouse, whispering, "Thank you. You don't know what this means." But Monica did. She knew exactly. That evening, back in her office, the city was drenched in sunset. Orange and rose spilled across the glass like liquid fire. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something instinct perhaps made her answer. "Ms. Sovich," a man's voice said. "This is Dr. Rafael Cortez. We met briefly last month at the Foundation Gala." She frowned, trying to recall. Yes, the pediatric surgeon who'd spoken about his volunteer work abroad. They'd shared one polite conversation over champagne and canapes, nothing more. "Yes, I remember. Hello, doctor. I was calling because I think you left this." He paused. "A copy of Letters to a Young Lawyer. There's a note inside in your handwriting. I thought it might be personal." Her mind raced. She must have slipped it into the wrong bag. "Thank you," she said, a small smile forming. "I didn't realize. I can return it maybe over coffee?" She hesitated. It had been years since a man's voice stirred something other than caution in her. "I don't drink coffee after 6, she said. Testing. "Then tea," he replied, easy warm. "Or silence. I'm good at both." For a moment she said nothing. Then softly, "Tea sounds fine." That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint city glow painting ripples of light on her skin. She wasn't sure why she'd agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe courage. Maybe the simple, startling thought that healing didn't have to mean closing every door. Through the thin wall, she could hear her sons breathing steady, peaceful. The rhythm reminded her of the sound that had once saved her 2 heartbeats, fragile but defiant. She closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time in years, the fire in her chest didn't burn from pain, it burned from life. The day began like any other, A bright, ordinary afternoon when the city shimmered beneath the late summer sun. Monica had just finished a custody hearing and was back in her office, the skyline reflecting on the glass behind her. Her jacket hung neatly on the chair. The air smelled faintly of jasmine tea and printer ink. She had been drafting closing statements when the phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. She almost ignored it. Almost. But something, a tremor in the air, a whisper of intuition, made her answer. "Hello?" The line crackled. Then came a pause, and a voice she had buried years ago. Monica. Her breath caught. The sound of his name, unspoken in her mind for years now, had found its way back into her lungs. Jeff. Even through static, his tone was the same, deep, careful, threaded with control. Except this time, there was something else beneath it. Fragility. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." The words were simple, almost fragile, yet they hit like thunder. For a long moment, Monica said nothing. She looked at her reflection in the glass, a woman standing tall, calm, every inch of her built from the ruins he'd left behind. 10 years ago, she would have trembled. Now her fingers didn't even twitch. "Jeff," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "You don't need to apologize." He hesitated. "I do. I was wrong. About everything." Her gaze fell on the photograph on her desk. The twins grinning with missing teeth, their arms around each other. She smiled faintly, a quiet flame of pride lighting her face. "Everything you broke," she said, her tone neither cruel nor forgiving. "I rebuilt. Stronger. Better." There was silence on the other end. Not the kind that demanded words, but the kind that admitted defeat. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. "I heard about your firm. You're doing amazing things." "I am," she said simply. "And the boys?" Her heart clenched, not from longing, but from the delicate weight of what he'd missed. "They're thriving," she said, "because they were loved enough for two." He exhaled a broken, regretful sound. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I think about it every day." "Then let it teach you something," she said softly. "But don't call again. Some ghosts don't need resurrection." Before he could answer, she ended the call. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. Outside, the sun dipped behind the buildings, turning the city to bronze. Monica sat still, staring at the faint reflection of her face in the window. For a moment, she didn't see the lawyer, or the mother, or the woman reborn. She saw the version of herself that had once begged him to stay. And she realized she didn't hate him anymore. What lingered wasn't pain, but gratitude. Because if he hadn't left, she might never have discovered the life waiting on the other side of despair. She whispered to the quiet room, "Thank you for leaving." Later that evening, Monica walked home under the dimming sky. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm: taxis, honking streetlights, flickering strangers moving in currents. But she felt strangely weightless, as if some old chain had quietly fallen away. When she reached her building, she saw Raphael waiting outside, hands in his coat pockets, that easy smile softening the edges of the world. "Rough day?" he asked, tilting his head. She hesitated, then nodded. "A call from my past. I didn't expect it to shake me. The past has good aim," he said gently. "It always hits where we think we've healed." They walked up together, silence flowing comfortably between them. Inside, the twins were sprawled on the couch, laughing at some old cartoon. The sound grounded her instantly, two bright anchors pulling her back to now. "Dinner's almost ready," Raphael said, slipping off his jacket. She watched him move around the kitchen's sleeves, rolled up stirring sauce, humming under his breath. And for a fleeting second, the contrast nearly brought her to tears. 10 years ago, Love had meant fear walking on glass waiting for storms. Now, it meant warmth. The quiet kind. The kind that made her feel safe enough to breathe. After the boys went to bed, Raphael poured them both tea and leaned against the counter. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. Monica looked down at her cup, the steam curling like ghosts into the air. "He said he was sorry," she murmured. "And for a moment I almost felt sorry too for him for what we lost. But then I realized—" She paused. "I don't owe the past an explanation. I already paid that debt." Raphael nodded, his eyes soft. "Closure doesn't always come from words." She smiled faintly. "No. Sometimes it comes from silence." He reached out, brushing her fingers with his, a gesture so simple, yet it steadied her more than any apology ever could. "You've turned pain into purpose," he said. "That's rare." "It's survival," she replied. "Nothing noble about it." "You say that," he said quietly, "but I've never met anyone who survived with so much grace." Her throat tightened. She looked away, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "You make it sound easy," she said. "No," he whispered. "I make it sound possible." Later that night, Monica stood by the window again, a habit she'd never lost. The city lights shimmered below, reflected in her eyes, like stars caught behind glass. She thought about Jeff's voice, the tremor in it, the apology hanging between them. And then she thought about the laughter in the next room, the soft breathing of her sons, the calm certainty of Raphael's presence. Life had given her two endings, one that broke her, and one that built her. Both had shaped the woman standing here now. She touched the window pane, the cool glass grounding her. "You were right, Jeff," she whispered into the night. "You couldn't be my peace, but you taught me how to find it." Somewhere deep inside she felt something shift, not an ache, but an opening. The ghost of her past hadn't come back to haunt her. It had come to say goodbye. The next morning, Monica walked into her office early. Sunlight spilled through the glass, scattering gold across her desk. She placed her phone down, glanced once at the missed call still logged there, then deleted it without hesitation. Her assistant poked her head in. "Good morning, Ms. Siovich. You have the fundraiser at noon and the press interview at 2. "Perfect," Monica said. "Let's start." The tone of her voice, calm, confident, alive, carried through the hall. Outside the city buzzed the world turning. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was chasing her life. She was living it. The news spread like perfume and smoke, impossible to ignore. Billionaire Jeff Henkins to Mary Cross Industries heiress in lavish Ritz-Carlton ceremony. Every headline was the same. Every photo captured the same smile: Jeff in his tuxedo, the new bride radiant in white, their hands entwined against the backdrop of wealth. Monica saw it accidentally on a news feed she hadn't meant to open. For a moment, the world stilled. Not from pain that had long been processed, buried, forgiven, but from memory, sharp and fleeting, like a song she hadn't heard in years. She closed her laptop quietly and turned toward the window. Chicago was gray that afternoon, the clouds thick with the promise of rain. Behind her, Max's laughter broke the silence. "Mom, you've got to see this." He was holding a paper airplane decorated with doodles of lightning bolts. Darius sat beside him, reading, calm as always. "What's that, baby?" "It's an invitation." Max grinned. "Not real, just practice. If I were rich, I'd throw a party with fireworks and cake and—" He paused, seeing something in her eyes. "Mom, you okay?" She smiled, smoothing his hair. "I'm fine. Just thinking. A beat of silence passed before Darius, thoughtful as ever, asked Mom, "What would you do if you met someone who once made you cry?" She looked between them. Two reflections of her life, one light, one shadow. Her answer came slowly, like truth spoken for the first time. "I'd stand tall," she said, "and smile so they'd see I'm still here, still whole." It rained on the day of the wedding, the kind of rain that turns streets to mirrors, that soaks through silk and pride alike. The Ritz-Carlton shimmered under silver clouds, its glass facade reflecting the blurred chaos of umbrellas and photographers. Monica hadn't planned to go. She had told herself she was above such scenes. But when the boys insisted, half curious, half daring, she gave in. "We'll only look from outside," she said, mostly to herself. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and laughter. Strings played softly, champagne flutes sparkled, and guests whispered about fortunes and futures. Monica's entrance went unnoticed at first. She wore a simple black dress, elegant, but understated, her hair swept into a knot, her sons in pressed shirts beside her. They did not belong there, and yet somehow they commanded the room the moment they entered. The crowd parted subtly, curiosity rippling through silk and pearls. She felt their eyes but didn't flinch. Darius held her hand tightly. Max tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, he's there." At the far end of the hall, Jeff stood on the stage beside his bride, older now, but still carrying that familiar air of confidence. Until his gaze found hers. The world went still. Music dulled, voices faded. Only the rain tapping against the tall windows kept time. Jeff's smile faltered. His hand clasped with his bride's dropped slightly. He looked again as if his eyes were lying. But there she was, Monica framed in the soft light, her sons standing like sentinels beside her. Her posture was effortless, her presence undeniable. And then in the silence that stretched too long, Darius took a step forward. "Dad." The word was small, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the air like thunder. Every head turned. The musicians stopped playing. The bride's grip tightened around Jeff's arm. Monica froze, her breath caught too late to stop it, too proud to retreat. Jeff's face drained of color. His eyes fell on the boys, their eyes, green and brown flecked with blue. His own reflected back. Recognition struck like lightning. For a heartbeat, time refused to move. Then chaos. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered in ripples of shock. The bride's family stiffened, their perfect smiles shattering at the edges. Monica didn't move. She stood steady in the storm of whispers, rain tracing down the glass behind her, like tears she no longer had to shed. Jeff took a slow step forward. "Monica." Her name on his tongue sounded strange, foreign, fragile. She met his gaze, calm as still water. "Congratulations," she said softly. Her voice carried through the hall, clear and steady. He stopped inches away, trembling slightly. "Are they?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The boys stood close, silent witnesses of a story they had never been told. "You have your answer," she said finally. "Now live with it." Lightning flared outside, throwing their faces into sharp relief. His regret, her composure, their son's quiet curiosity. It was not revenge she felt. It was peace. The kind that comes when every wound has finally healed into something stronger than skin. Jeff's fiancée. The woman in white stepped forward, then confusion flickering behind her poise. "Jeff, what is this?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Monica turned to her sons. "Let's go, boys." They nodded, their small hands finding hers without hesitation. As they turned to leave, she paused once more, not to look back, but to breathe, to let the moment settle, burn, and vanish. Outside, Rain poured harder, drumming against umbrellas and marble. But Monica didn't rush. The boys laughed as they splashed through puddles, their shoes soaking their joy, unbothered by the storm. She lifted her face to the sky, letting the water wash over her. The air smelled of wet stone and something else, renewal. For the first time in years, she felt light. Not because the past was gone, but because it no longer owned her. Later that night back home, Darius curled up beside her. "Mom," he murmured, "was he really our dad?" She hesitated, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. "He was part of our beginning," she said, "but not our story." Max, half asleep, mumbled, "You were enough, Mom." Her throat tightened. Maybe she whispered, "But you two made me more than enough." Outside, thunder faded into distance. The storm had passed. She sat by the window long after they'd fallen asleep, watching the last drops slide down the glass. Somewhere across the city, a man in a ruined tuxedo was staring at the same rain, realizing too late what he'd lost. But Monica didn't think of him anymore. Her thoughts were of the future of morning pancakes, of laughter, of quiet, ordinary days that once felt impossible. The world was wide again, and though rain still fell, it only made the city shine brighter. The storm didn't end with the ceremony. By the time the last guests had fled, the chaos rain still poured over downtown Chicago, smearing the city lights into liquid gold. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was empty now, confetti melting into puddles, champagne glasses, half-full music long gone. Jeff stood alone under the awning. His tuxedo soaked the silk of his tie, hanging loose like a man who had run out of excuses. Somewhere in the distance, the laughter of the press faded into static. And then he saw her. Monica. She stood across the courtyard under the flickering hotel lights, her black dress darkened by rain. Her sons beside her, the two small anchors of a world he'd never known. For a moment, Jeff simply watched them. The woman who had once loved him enough to forgive the unforgivable, now standing just beyond reach, calm in a way that terrified him. He stepped forward. Monica. Her name broke through the drizzle like a prayer long denied. She turned, not startled, just patient, as though she'd been expecting this all along. The boys were already walking toward the car parked at the curb. They knew. This was not their moment to share. When they were far enough, Monica faced him fully. Jeff's voice trembled, stripped of the arrogance that once wrapped around every word he spoke. "I lost you." He took a breath. "I've lost everything good that ever happened to me." His words hung in the damp air, heavy with regret. Monica studied him for a moment. The man before her looked older, smaller somehow. The lines around his eyes weren't from time, but consequence. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, not cruel, not forgiving, just true. "No one loses Jeff. We only learn too late what we chose to ignore." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "You were my peace. I just didn't know it then." A faint, almost wistful smile curved her lips. "No, Jeff. I was your mirror, and you couldn't bear what you saw in it." For a while they stood in silence, rain dripping steadily from the edge of the awning. Cars passed by, headlights streaking across their faces, two silhouettes suspended between past and present. Jeff finally stepped closer. "Is there anything I can do? For you? For them?" She looked down, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. "You can stop trying to fix what's already healed. I just want to make things right." "There's no such thing," she said softly. "There's only living with what we've done." The sound of her words seemed to knock the breath out of him. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out something small, a photograph creased at the edges. It was from years ago. Their wedding day. She was laughing, her head thrown back. Sunlight caught in her hair. "I kept this," he said, "even when I didn't deserve to." Monica's gaze lingered on the image, but her eyes didn't soften. "That woman doesn't exist anymore," she murmured. "She died the night you left. But the one standing in front of you, she learned to live without needing anyone to save her." Lightning flared far off in the clouds, echoing faintly like memory. Jeff pressed a hand against his forehead, his voice breaking. "You have every right to hate me." "I don't," she replied. He looked up, startled. "Hate is a weight, Jeff. I carried it once, but it only chained me to you. I let it go." She took a slow breath, rain misting around her. "You see, we didn't survive because of what we lost. We survived in spite of it. I raised our boys on the belief that love isn't ownership, it's courage. The courage to walk away when staying means disappearing." He nodded slowly, shame sinking in like cold water. "They're beautiful," he whispered. "I saw their eyes. They have yours." "No," she said softly, glancing toward the car. "They have their own." He laughed, a small broken sound that turned quickly into silence. "I thought building an empire would make me a man," he said. "Turns out I just built a cage." Monica tilted her head slightly, compassion flickering behind her calm. "Then learn to walk out of it. How? By forgiving yourself. That's the part I can't do for you." Her words landed gently, yet they carried more weight than any verdict he'd ever heard. He took another step forward, desperate to hold her gaze. "And if I can't, then you'll spend the rest of your life looking for me in every woman who isn't me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I wouldn't wish that on anyone." For a moment, it seemed like he might cry. But Jeff had never been good at letting things fall apart. So he did what he always did. He hid behind silence. And Monica mercifully didn't try to fill it. She turned toward the street, the air between them humming with everything they hadn't said. "Goodbye, Jeff." He reached out his hand, hovering just inches from her shoulder, then fell back. "Monica," he whispered. She looked at him one last time. Her eyes, clear and steady, reflected not anger, not longing, only peace. "Learn to live with your shadows," she said. "That's how you find the light." Then she walked away, her heels striking puddles, her silhouette dissolving into the soft drizzle. Jeff stood there long after she was gone. The rain had slowed to a mist, a faint gray veil draping over the street. He watched the car door open, the two boys leaning toward the window, their mother between them, a picture of the life he could never reclaim. When the car disappeared around the corner, Jeff looked up at the sky. The storm had ended, but the quiet it left behind was louder than thunder. Monica drove in silence, the city receding behind them. Darius leaned his head on her shoulder. Max hummed softly to the rhythm of the wipers. "Are you okay, Mom?" Darius asked. She smiled faintly. "Yes, it's just strange seeing a ghost that's still alive." "He looked sad," Max murmured. "Sometimes sadness is how people finally tell the truth," she said. They rode the rest of the way home without speaking. Outside, the sky cleared a soft blue, threading through the last curtain of clouds. When they reached home, Monica stood by the window, watching the last droplets slide down the glass. In their faint reflection, she saw herself not the woman who left in the snow, not the one who broke under betrayal, but the one who survived the rain and stayed standing. The city exhaled below her. The world was clean again. She whispered to her reflection, "You did it. You walked through the storm, and you didn't drown." Behind her, the boys were laughing, arguing about whose turn it was to feed the cat. Life went on gloriously ordinary. And for the first time, Monica didn't feel the need to look back. 10 years later, the garden was full of light. Chicago's spring had never felt so alive. The air warm, the breeze, gentle sunlight filtering through the branches of the old oak tree that stretched across the yard like a witness to all her years. Darius and Max, no longer boys, but young men, were in the middle of a soccer match on the grass. Their laughter rippled through the afternoon, clear and unguarded, echoing off the wooden fence and spilling into the open sky. Beside them, Raphael, still impossibly kind, still quietly strong, pretended to play defense and failed spectacularly, letting Max score. Both boys cheered, teasing him for being too slow for a doctor. From the porch, Monica watched, smiling over the rim of her teacup. She didn't call out, didn't interrupt. She just let herself absorb the sight. The harmony of it, the ordinary miracle of peace. It had taken her half a lifetime to arrive here. And every piece of it, even the broken ones, had somehow led her home. On the small table beside her sat a weathered envelope, cream paper edges curled, the ink slightly faded. It had arrived 3 months earlier, forwarded from her old office. The return address had stopped her heart for half a second. Jeffrey Henkins. For days, she'd left it unopened. Not out of fear, but because she no longer needed anything from inside. Still this morning, under the soft gold of April light, she had finally unfolded it. The handwriting was careful, as though written by someone who'd spent years learning how to be honest. Monica, there are no words for what I took from you, or what I learned because of you. You once said that love isn't about owning. I understand that now. Thank you for giving me something I didn't deserve the chance to see who I really was. If there's grace in this life, I hope it finds you because you were mine. Always, Jeff. The letter trembled slightly in her hand, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. She set it down gently, letting the breeze lift its corner. Her gaze drifted back to the garden. Raphael had collapsed theatrically into the grass, the twins hovering over him laughing. It was a small, chaotic, radiant scene, one she could never have imagined in the years she spent surviving. Raphael looked up, caught her watching, and raised a hand in mock surrender. "They're ruthless," he called out, smiling. "You raised wolves, not sons." She laughed, a sound that carried through the yard like sunlight. "I raised men," she said. "The world will be fine." He grinned, wiping sweat from his forehead, and in that moment, she felt it again, that quiet gratitude that comes not from falling in love, but from arriving there gently, without fear. Raphael had never tried to fix her. He had simply stood beside her, patient as the tide, until she was ready to believe in calm again. Later that afternoon, the boys disappeared inside, arguing over music playlists and snacks. The yard fell silent, except for the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. Monica poured the last of her tea, opened her journal, and began to write. The first page was dated 15 years ago, ink smudged by tears, the handwriting uneven. She traced the words with her fingertip. "If no one believes in me, I'll learn to believe in myself." She smiled. Then she turned to the last page and wrote slowly, deliberately, the same way one plants something sacred. "Forgiveness isn't for the one who hurt us. It's for the one who survived." She paused, pen still against the paper. "We forgive to make room for peace, not for them, but for the selves we almost lost." When she finished, she closed the journal, exhaled, and let the sunlight warm her face. From inside, she heard music. Darius strumming his guitar, Max humming along, their voices, unpolished but beautiful. She thought of the night she'd carried them home from the hospital, tiny bodies pressed against her chest, unsure how she would ever keep them alive. She thought of the years that followed, the hunger, the fear, the studying in the dark after they'd fallen asleep. And then, of all the mornings she'd woken to their laughter, realizing she already had everything she'd ever prayed for. Every struggle had carved space for this peace. Raphael came up behind her, then his steps soft against the porch wood. He rested a hand on her shoulder. No words, just presence. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Better than okay," she said. He followed her gaze toward the garden. The afternoon light spilled over the three figures, the two boys and the man who had chosen to love them as his own. The sun turned their outlines golden, almost unreal, like something out of a memory that refused to fade. "They're growing fast," Raphael said, half in awe, half in dread. "I know." She smiled. "Soon they'll leave. That's what we raised them for." He studied her face, calm, wise, touched by the years, yet untouched by bitterness. "You ever think about the past?" She nodded. "Sometimes, but not with pain anymore. And him." She looked toward the old oak tree where the light filtered through in soft waves. "He's part of my story," she said, "but not the ending." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of lavender and rain-soaked earth. Monica stood stretching her arms toward the sky. "It's strange," she murmured. "For so long I thought healing meant forgetting. But it doesn't. It means remembering without bleeding." Raphael smiled, reaching for her hand. "You've turned pain into wisdom, Monica." "No," she said gently, "just into love." Evening began to fall, soft, pink, endless. The boys ran outside again, calling for her. "Mom, dinner's ready." Raphael burned the pasta. She laughed, walking down the steps barefoot on the grass. They pulled her into their noise, their light, and as the four of them sat under the fading sky, she realized how rare it was to recognize happiness in the very moment it was happening. Not as something she chased, but as something she had quietly, stubbornly built, moment by moment, breath by breath. When the stars came out, she returned once more to the porch, the letter from Jeff still resting on the table. She picked it up, folded it neatly, and tucked it inside her journal. Not to keep, but to close. She whispered into the dusk, not to him, not to the past, but to herself. Love isn't what fills us. It's what brings us back to ourselves. The garden shimmered under starlight, the laughter of her sons rising in the distance, Raphael's voice joining theirs. And Monica, the woman who once walked through snow with nothing, finally stood bathed in warmth, whole and free. Women don't need to be strong from the start, only willing to rise again and again. If this story made you believe in your own rebirth, share it so someone somewhere might find their light after the storm.